Perfect. Okay, listen, I love the Bible, and I am unafraid to say that. I'm a preacher. You shouldn't question that, I guess. But there's something that really bugs me about the Bible, and that is how tiny the print is. You guys notice that? Like every Bible you ever get, like look, we're contributing to this problem. Anytime somebody gets baptized, we give them a Bible, and you need a magnifying glass to read that thing. Like I have no idea. I mean, I guess it's just an issue of like space and like if you've ever read like First and Second Chronicles, like there's a lot there, and you got to cram. I get it, but it's and the thing about it is weird about it is so I grew up in a time when we were concerned about our eyes. And I'm not trying to, talk badly about anybody or the whole world at this point, but I remember if you sat within a few feet of the TV, your mom would yell at you because you're going to hurt your eyes. And now we all take phones and go like this. So apparently our eyes just evolved, I guess, in the last 30 years to be totally fine. Or we'll all go blind. Who knows? We're going to find out together. So the first Bible I got, because of all this, I got a giant print Bible when I was like in 7th grade. I was going to get baptized, and my parents were like, we're going to give you a Bible. Let's go to the Christian bookstore. Remember those? And so we went to that, and I looked at all the Bibles, and I was like, well, this one I can actually read. Like, I can read this thing from space. This is fantastic. Like, this is absolutely for like elderly blind people. That's the one I want. And so I got this Bible, giant print, all that stuff. A consequence of the giant print Bible was I had so much room to write in the margins and so I immediately did that. If you could see this very first Bible I had, it was like 40% of it was stuff I had written. Like it was no longer scripture. It was like the Bible then with all my stuff. And so I remember how this began. I remember the first time I actually did this. I first got this Bible, and I was really excited to read the Bible for the first time. And I looked at like the length of some of the books, and I was like, man, I don't want to read First, Second Chronicles. That's gonna take me forever. I want to be able to say I read a book of the Bible like today. And First, Second Chronicles like a month-long excursion. So I decided I was going to read all the little books. And so even, it's funny like how your stupid decisions as a 7th grader impact you. I still know the little books way better than all the big ones. And so like one of the first little books that I read was First Peter. I'd heard of that dude. He's the guy at the pearly gates, right? So what's he got to say? I wanted to see what that was about. So I remember reading First Peter. The very first Bible verse I ever like underlined, I ever made a note about, I ever made sure I would remember was 1 Peter 5:7. This is that verse. It says this. It's very short. I liked the short. It was good. It says, "Give all your worries and cares to God, for He cares about you." Man, that's good. That's good stuff. That's good stuff. That preaches well. That's why I'm doing it right now. It preaches well. You may remember. You may remember a few weeks ago, this was actually in the sermon, like 4 or 5 weeks ago. And what we talked about 4 or 5 weeks ago, we were having this whole conversation about Emperor Nero and about how the early church was persecuted and all that stuff. You remember, like he killed his mom, that whole stuff. So then they starts killing Christians because there's a fire. If you guys don't remember that, listen better. So it was like 4 weeks ago. And so I'm just kidding. You can listen at your own speed. I'm not judging anybody. A little bit. The point is, we talked about this passage, and I didn't really highlight it, right? Because the point was, Peter and his death, and he was crucified upside down, and writing to the church about, holding up under persecution and all of that. And so that was the message. But when I was in 7th grade, I didn't know any of that. I didn't know who Nero was. I barely knew who Peter was. I didn't know anything about church history. All I knew was that I read a verse that said that God cares about me. And I thought that was fantastic. And not just God cares about me, but God cares about the things that I'm worried about. Again, fantastic. I'm in 7th grade, right? My worries were pretty low on the real life problem scale. I was worried about gym class. And I was worried about like I'm in 7th grade, I'm 12, and I'm like, wait, did girls always look like that? Have they always been just impossible to talk to? Because I could have swore like a year ago I could talk to that girl. And now I try and nothing comes out. I remember the first time we had math that had like letters in it. That's not math. And then they're like, well, let's talk about shapes. And I'm like, that's way harder than kindergarten shapes. I know what those shapes are, but my problems were stupid, is what I'm saying. Everything was stupid. And yet, despite the relative pettiness of my problems, here's a passage that's telling me that God cares. The creator of the universe, the one who made everything, the one who created reality itself. Right? If everything, I use this illustration a lot, I really like it. If everything that exists can be contained in a box, God exists outside of the box because he made the box and he made all the stuff in it. That guy, outside of the existence of reality, cares about, my mile time in gym class. That was crazy to me, and I loved it, and it was amazing. And I was like, man, I just have to make a note of that. And there was something so like pure and I think maybe innocent and extremely ignorant about the way I was approaching the Bible back then, right? Every time I read the Bible, I thought, okay, this applies to me somehow. Somehow, some way, this is the thing that applies to me. This is the thing that is meant for me. And that's how I read the Bible. And if you guys know me, you know that's not how I read the Bible now. And as a person grows and changes and learns, you start figuring out that the Bible is not about you for the same reason the world is not about you, for the reason that, life is not about you, that virtually nothing's about you. But you lose something, right? Like somewhere along the way of learning about like history and kings' names and empires and dates and timelines and interpretations and this is allegorical maybe and this is literal probably and that's definitely not and what are we going to do? And then you get into like atonement theories and you get into like, the East-West schism and you start talking about like, well, this is what the Catholics think and this is why and this is what the Orthodox Church thinks and this is why and this is the Protestant Reformation, this is what the Reformers say and here's the Mormons and here's the people showing up at your door and you just do all of that stuff and verses stop being about you and they become much less heartwarming. And I think maybe the best example of that is not the first verse that I read, but it's the concept of miracles. Like I don't know what happened, but somewhere along the way I've become very jaded about miracles. And I think it's just because I've been in the church my whole life and, I've been preaching for, 17, 18 years of preaching. And, okay, look, Jesus fed 5,000 people and that was cool. Good job. And Jesus one day, he's at a wedding and they run out of booze and he's like, I want you guys to drink more wine for you. That's a pretty cool one. That's a good one. Jesus, he walks on water, high five. He calms the storm. Nice job. We have all these miracles. He heals lepers. Impressive. Very good. He casts out demons. I'm happy for those people. But look, so Jesus feeds the 5,000. I still got to go to Mosier's. I'm still at the mercy of what's on sale this week. I wanted a ribeye, but it's $15.99. Guess I'll do something else. We're still doing that. Right? The water to wine, the water to wine miracle has like 15 different levels of significance. But at the end of the day, let's be real clear. If I turn the faucet at my house, Merlot does not come out. It's just water. So good job, you did it once, but that is less helpful. All the healing of the sick, you can tell me that Jesus heals the sick all day, but I still have a deductible on my insurance. And I still have to meet that deductible before I'm ever going to go to the ER. The reality of miracles is that it just seems so disconnected from our everyday life. It's the ultimate. When I first looked at this series and I first said, okay, so what? We've been talking for the last few weeks about we're most of our faith is just stuff we agree with. How do we take the stuff we agree with and make it mean something in our everyday lives? The first thing I thought of was miracles. Because full disclosure, I don't care. I just don't. And I especially, part of why I don't care is because most Christian teaching for somewhere along 1,500 years or so has said that the miracle stories exist to confirm the message of Jesus. Okay? Like, in other words, Jesus is God in the flesh. Jesus is the Son of God. Jesus dies on the cross. Jesus raised from the dead. Jesus provides salvation for all. Jesus ascended to heaven and exists there now. Jesus, all the stuff. And we want you to believe in it. And so to convince you that you should believe in Jesus, that we should believe all of this really important stuff, it's like, okay, well, to prove it, this one time he walked on water. This one time he fed 5,000 people. This one time, there's a man with a withered hand and he just made it come back fine. Like over and over and over. Like this guy can't walk and Jesus makes him. All of that we kind of relegate to confirmation of the actual message. So miracles, I've been taught most of my life, miracles aren't really the thing. They're a thing that points to the thing. And I think most of us have been taught some variation of this. That the reason we can trust that Jesus is divine is he did this supernatural stuff. The reason we can trust that Jesus is God is he did stuff no prophet could do. Like we read stories of the prophets doing miracles, but Jesus' miracles are way bigger, way better. And so the whole idea of miracles for us is just to point to something else. And I'll be honest, you don't need to convince me that Jesus is God in the flesh. I already believe that. You don't have to convince me that Jesus died on the cross and rose from the dead and ascended to heaven and provided salvation for everybody. I already believe that. So if the miracles are just to confirm a message, and I already believe the message, I'm not sure what point I have in needing the miracles. And that's how I have felt for a long time. That's how I feel most of the time. And I don't like that. If nothing else, because, man, there's a whole lot of Jesus' ministry that is just miracles. Like, if you're like, well, I don't know how much I care about that, then I'm just kind of putting a lot of it to the side. And so I had this thought. And this thought, it kind of went like this. The people that Jesus performed miracles for, the people that Jesus healed, the people that Jesus fed, the people that witnessed his supernatural stuff, sometimes they understood that he's the Messiah and he's the Christ and all of that. Of course, sometimes. There is some degree of truth in the confirmation thing. But maybe the most famous miracle that Jesus ever performs is the feeding of the 5,000. And if you read carefully in the story of the Gospels, what we learn is that those people universally, unanimously learned nothing. Not one thing. In fact, the conclusion they came to was exactly the opposite. If you read the book of John, Jesus feeds the 5,000, and the next day they all show back up looking for more food. And Jesus says, what are you guys doing? Why do you want more? And it's a whole conversation. And the end of that conversation results in all the people just leaving Jesus and saying, well, never mind. We don't like that guy after all. The truth of the matter, then, is the feeding of the 5,000 as a miracle exists entirely separately from any message Jesus was trying to convey. And as it turns out, that's the way most of these miracles are. We have absolutely not one shred of evidence that when Jesus performs miracles for most people, that they become Christians, that they follow in his footsteps. Like, probably, maybe. You would think you would. But it's not like there's not like an epilogue, right? Like, I've been watching Unsolved Mysteries from the 80s. I've mentioned this. And the best part about watching Unsolved Mysteries from the 80s now is you have an update, right? Like, you learn, did they catch the, Colombian drug lord or not? They did. Good job. 1988 FBI did a great job. It's great. It's great. Sometimes it's sad. It's like, oh, that missing girl. I wonder if they'll find her. Yeah, they found her. She's dead. Sad. That one's not a good one. But at least we have closure on this story from 1991. That's what's great about Unsolved Mysteries is you have now, not back then, and not the new ones. The new ones are like, I watch the new ones and I'm like, okay, where's the update? They're like, no, we filmed that like 3 weeks ago. We'd like your help. I'm like, where? I'm not going to help you with that. Anyway, the Bible is like Unsolved Mysteries now. It doesn't tell us Did that person actually become a Christian? Did that person follow Jesus? Like, it doesn't tell us. And what that means then is that the miracles themselves are enough on their own. It's worth telling the story entirely separate from any message that it might confirm. There is something to learn. There is something to draw from. And those people were blessed in a way that is completely aside from any theology, any, seminary education, anything, simply by being, healed or fed or whatever the miracle is. And so the question is, as we've been talking about for a few weeks now, how do we draw a line between the things we agree with? Everybody believes that Jesus, if you're a Christian, everybody believes that Jesus did miracles. Okay. How do we draw a line from Jesus does the miracle to it's Tuesday afternoon, and what does that mean to me? It's Thursday evening, what does that mean to me? And I think what we need to do is stop talking about the miracles. And I think we need to start talking about a miracle. Just pick one. And so if we're going to pick one, we should pick my favorite. We were already talking about my favorite of other stuff. Let's just do favorite day. Let's talk about my favorite miracle. It goes like this. One day, Jesus was traveling, and he's got this huge crowd of people. It's at the point in his ministry, like there's sometimes Jesus in his ministry can walk around and nobody really cares and he's just a guy. But then there's other times where he's sufficiently famous enough that there's just massive crowds. Like he's like, a conquering hero or something. It's like the parade after your team wins the championship. Like everybody is there. And so this is like you just won, the Super Bowl kind of championship thing. Jesus walking and there's just so many people that just want to see him and talk to him. But on this particular day, in this particular place, there was one guy who really was desperate to see Jesus. And that man's name was Jairus. Now, Jairus, as it turns out, is not usually the sort of guy who would want to hang out with Jesus. Jairus was one of the leaders of the synagogue there. And I'm not sure if you guys have heard this before or not, but the religious leaders of the Jews didn't always get along with Jesus. I know. Shocking. But Jairus is one of those leaders. He opposes Jesus. He doesn't think Jesus is real. He thinks he's real, but he doesn't think he's telling the truth. He doesn't think Jesus is telling the truth. He doesn't think Jesus is the Messiah. He doesn't think Jesus' miracles are anything. He doesn't think any of that. Under every other circumstance, Jairus would say, look, I don't want Jesus in my town at all, much less I don't want to talk to him. But, grief and pain will make you do funny things. Grief and pain will make you do things you don't even believe in, just because maybe. And so Jairus doesn't believe in Jesus, but he's heard Jesus can heal people, and Jairus has his daughter, and she's sick and dying. Like, she probably just had, like, a fever or something because it was 2,000 years ago, and, everything killed everybody 2,000 years ago. But to them, it was this illness that they couldn't do anything with. And his daughter is literally on death's door. And so here's Jesus, a man that he generally would oppose, a man who he generally would be against and doesn't believe in. But if it's his daughter's life or his pride, if it's his daughter's life or the tribe that he's supposed to defend, he'll choose the daughter's life. And so much to the chagrin, I am sure, of the other leaders of the synagogue, much to the chagrin of the other Pharisees and Sadducees and the rest, he approaches Jesus. And everybody knows him. Everybody knows he's a respected guy. He's, everybody, they go to the synagogue and they see him. And so, it's hard to get to Jesus, but not if you're Jairus. Like Jairus, they let him through. And Jairus literally falls on his knees in front of Jesus and just begs Jesus for help. He tells him the situation. He says, look, my daughter is dying, and I desperately need help. Can you please heal her? And Jesus being Jesus, and this being a story in the Bible that generally has a good ending, wouldn't it be terrible? I've mentioned this before. Wouldn't it be terrible? Jesus is like, no, I'm good. No, Jesus. That's not what Jesus does. Jesus hears the guy and he says, of course I'll heal your daughter. And that's when we read this in the Gospel according to Mark. We read this. Jesus went with him, being Jairus, and all the people followed, crowding around him. A woman in the crowd had suffered for 12 years with constant bleeding. She had suffered a great deal from many doctors, and over the years she had spent everything she had to pay them, but she had gotten no better. In fact, she had gotten worse. She'd heard about Jesus, so she came up behind him through the crowd and touched his robe, for she thought to herself, if I can just touch his robe, I'll be healed. Immediately the bleeding stopped, and she could feel in her body that she had been healed of her terrible condition. Now, what we're talking about Drew in 7th grade, this story was always very confusing to me. Because look, I read that, you read that, and you're like, oh, she's bleeding. Get a Band-Aid. Y'all don't want Band-Aids? Like, and also, because, like, it can't be that bad. She's bleeding for 12 years. If it's that big of a wound, she will bleed out. The reason I don't understand this is because, you know, in 7th and 8th grade, I thought a menstrual cycle, I thought that was what happens when 12 jurors can't decide on a case. And so the judge says, we've got to start all over. I declare a menstrual cycle. Well, we're talking about favorite things. That's my favorite joke I have ever written in a sermon. And if you don't think it's funny, we cannot be friends. Thank you for laughing at that. I was very concerned nobody would laugh. I told Stephanie, and she's like, nobody's going to laugh at that. Great. Leaning into that. Anyway, I don't know what a period is what I'm saying. I'm in 7th grade. I grew up in like a conservative Christian house. My parents never sat me down and like, let me tell you about the ways of the woman. It never happened. Okay? So I read the Bible. Of course, now I understand this is a lady problem, right? And it's a real problem. Like this is a difficulty because the Jewish people have laws about menstruation because they didn't know what menstruation was. I just imagine like the Old Testament is being like written and assembled and put together and everybody's like, we got to come up with rules about that time that ladies bleed because that scares everybody. And it seems to spread to all the other ladies. Like one person gets it, now everybody gets it. And of course, it's just dudes writing it down. So they're like, I don't know, have her sit outside of the tent on a chair for a week. Let's do that. I get it. It's confusing. But because of that, that's how it worked. You were supposed to isolate for that period of time. However long it lasts, you're supposed to not be around people. You're not supposed to touch people. You're not supposed to like sit on the places they sit. It's this whole thing because these are nomadic people thousands of years ago and they don't understand. They're just afraid. Right? And before we think, what idiots, just like fast forward in your head what scientific advancements are going to happen in the year like 5224 and what morons they're going to think we are for the idiocy and the superstition we believe. This is just how humanity works. So the result is for this woman who has whatever problem she has, and I don't know, like maybe a doctor today can come up with some answer as to what it was, but she never stops her period. She starts bleeding and it doesn't stop. And that means she has to isolate indefinitely away from everybody. She can't go to synagogue. She can't be with her family. She can't be with her friends. If she was married when this started, her husband would have divorced her and everybody would have said like, yeah, you've got every right to do that. Have at it. If she wasn't married, that means she's not getting married. And you might think, well, she should just start a career. Oh, 2,000 years ago was a little different. Things are today. 50 years ago was a little different than they are today. Do us well to remember that. But 2,000 years ago, for sure, very, very different. And so she has no options. She's isolated from the community. She can't have access to her religion. She can't be with her family. She can't, if she has a child before this happened, she wouldn't have had access to the child. That's almost too heartbreaking to talk about. 12 years. She's all by herself. I mean, this is as bad as leprosy is the point. This is as bad as any other infectious kind of disease where they didn't know what to do, so they said, just go over there. And again, I get why they did that. They're just trying to survive. They don't know what's going on. We didn't know what germs were until 100 years ago. Like, at the end of the day, like, they were trying, and this was their solution, but it created this horrible problem for this woman. And so she'd gone everywhere. She'd gone to all sorts of help, and nobody had helped her. And so she, like Jairus, is just desperate. We have no idea what she believes or doesn't believe. No idea. She obviously believes something off, though, because she actually she's like, if I could just touch Jesus' clothing, I'll be healed. I got to tell you, there's no evidence whatsoever for that. Like, she, I don't know where she came up with that. Maybe she made it up. Maybe she got it from some weird pagan thing. I don't know. But, like, she literally, like, that's just her thing is, well, maybe. And as it turns out, it works. It's kind of a fun lesson, by the way. Have no idea why she thought that, but it worked anyway. Have no real, like, Bible verse telling us this is what you should do, but it worked anyway. We should do well to remember that, too. But she's healed. And what I love about this miracle, aside from just her and her story, and that's most of why it's my favorite, I love Jesus' accidental miracle. Jesus doesn't mean to heal this woman. He doesn't even know this woman. He doesn't know this woman's around. I'm spoiling the next Bible verse a little bit, but like, he has no idea this woman, he has no clue what's going on. This was an accident. Let's just go ahead and keep reading. This is what we read continually in the gospel according to Mark. Jesus realized at once that healing power had gone out from him. Apparently that's a thing. So he turned around in the crowd and he asked, "Who touched my robe?" His disciples said to him, "Look at this crowd pressing around you. How could you ask, 'Who touched me?'" But he kept looking around to see who had done it. Then the frightened woman, trembling at the realization of what had happened to her, came and fell to her knees in front of him and told him what she had done. And he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace. Your suffering is over." There's a lot we got to unpack there. But look, it's hilarious that Jesus accidentally healed somebody. Like, when you're so good at what you do it by accident. That's pretty cool. Like, that's great. And she didn't even touch him. She touched like the part of his robe. Like, he just, just like they brush against, Jesus just brushes against people and they get healed. Incredible. Amazing. But of course now Jesus wants to know who did it. Right? Like, Jesus, like, I healed somebody. I felt that. So apparently that's a thing. Jesus feels healing. So many questions. I don't know. I'm going to ask when I die. Be like, "Hey, Jesus, what's the story with that?" Well, I'll ask that after I ask about dinosaurs because I have so many questions about dinosaurs. But then we'll eventually get to Bible stuff, and this is on the top of my list. It's on the list. It doesn't matter. He actually heals this woman, and he's like, "Hey, I don't know who did that. I have no idea who did this." And he's looking around, and I love the disciples. Like, we always think the disciples like these guys that are kind of like buffoons. Like, they're like, they don't like, they're like, "Jesus, we can't do that." But in this case, like, if you guys been to like a Mizzou football game or like any sporting event, like, you're touching that entire arena of people. You got to go to the bathroom at halftime, and everybody jostles you. Everybody bumps into you. Everybody, it's a thing, right? How could you possibly tell who touched you? You're in a mosh pit at a concert. Who pushed me? Like, everybody, Jesus. What do you think we are? Like, that's, everybody is touching Jesus. And he's like, "No, but somebody did it and they got healed." And the woman is actually easy to spot because she's got to tell. She's the only one in the crowd who's terrified. And she's terrified because as a woman with her particular problem, she's not supposed to touch anyone, which means she was breaking every rule in the book, literally in the book, by even showing up to talk to Jesus. She broke every rule. Because to get to Jesus, what I just say about the Mizzou football game, she touches everybody. And everybody she touches becomes unclean because of her. She's not supposed to be in a crowd of people. She's not supposed to be around one person. And she's terrified that Jesus is going to yell at her. Or worse, stone her for breaking the law here. Because she's not supposed to touch anybody, and now she's touched Jesus, the guy everybody wants to see. And that's what makes Jesus' response to her just so incredible. He calls her daughter. 12 years, nobody gave her a family name. Daughter? Our daughters are the most precious things in the world. Daughter? Jesus is speaking on behalf of God. You are God's daughter. That's who you are. You are included. You are family. Don't ever be afraid of touching me. Don't ever be afraid to approach God. And then he offers her peace, and he tells her she has faith. He affirms her decision making. Like, this is a woman who broke every law she possibly could have. And Jesus says, no, you were right to do it. You did it out of faith. You're made well right now because you are a woman of deep faith. I mean, it's just incredible. He shows her love and compassion and mercy and kindness. And there is not one shred of evidence she ever becomes a Christian or knows who he is. Whatever weird superstition she has to like touch his robe, like that's where she's at. I mean, maybe. Look, it'd be wonderful. What a great epilogue if it's like, no, she became a Christian and she became a leader in the church and she's taught all these other people. It'd be great. It's just not there. This act of kindness and mercy and grace and inclusion, of sharing with someone who no one else is kind to kindness, of sharing with a lawbreaker the truth that it doesn't matter at all of that stands on its own. Because at the end of the day, that was enough motivation for Jesus. Jesus didn't need to tell her everything. Jesus didn't need to confirm a message. The miracle itself and then the kindness behind it was enough. You're probably wondering about that daughter of Jairus. Yeah, she died. What a terrible epilogue. He brings her back. It's good. Anyway, sorry. I don't know why I said it like that. I didn't need to. Didn't need to say it like that at all. Good story. Here's the point. I think it's hard for us to think about God caring about us. Because why would God care about us? God made everything. Why are my problems anything that God would ever care about? And I know y'all are like, well, I know God cares. Do you? Like, I know we confess it. I know we read it. But it's really hard to feel like it, at least for me. Maybe I'm the only one. I just think about how petty everything must be to God. Like, the stuff we think is big is petty to God, right? Like, we think about, like, like plague and, pandemics and war. And what is that to God? God is eternal, meaning God has no beginning. Which means, let's just go with it, that we're told that the earth is 4.5 billion years old, right? God's older than that because he made the thing. God made the earth 4.5 billion years ago. Even like the worst wars we talk about, like the world wars we had, they lasted a few years. They're like that. They're nothing. God doesn't. What would God care about that? He's fine. We read in the Bible that God is not served by human hands, meaning we don't make God's life better, right? Like, if we don't believe in God, God's still God. If we do believe in God, God's still God. We don't impact the reality of God. Which means God has no reason to care at all. Everything is petty and small to God. And yet, God becomes a person, and that person finds a woman that nobody cares about, and he shows he cares. Which is why one of his friends, a man who had all sorts of petty problems. Oh, man, Peter can't get out of his own way. He's got so many petty problems. Peter can say, guys, God cares. I know it doesn't seem almost doesn't seem possible that an eternal being who creates reality itself would care about your Tuesday, but he does. And I know there's 8 billion of us here, and he cares about all 8 billion of us. Like, he cares. This is one of my favorite stories in the Old Testament, the favorites. It ends with it being like God cares about this whole city and also all the animals in there. What? Like, God cares. And so what that means is that there is no insignificant day. It means that not only are we never alone, but it means that there is nothing that is unimportant, ultimately. If it is important to us, it is important to God. Now, that doesn't mean that God is affirming everything we do. It may be that what's important to us is really stupid, and God wants us to learn, don't care about that. But he cares that we care, and so he wants to teach us not to care about that. But God still ultimately cares enough to want to help. And we don't have to have everything right, and we don't have to believe everything correctly. We can just be. And the miracle stories teach us over and over and over. And when you think about it, it's all dumb. Feeding the 5,000, they were hungry the next day. Turning water to wine, they drank that and they needed more. Raising the dead, those people died again. Even the most dramatic ones, raising the dead. Lazarus is not walking around somewhere in this world right now. Dude died again. Had to die again. Like, it's all ultimately petty. It's all ultimately small and insignificant. But even still, it's all wildly important to God because it is what's important to us. When we approach God in faith, when we approach God through faith in Christ, who is the way, the truth, and the life, he's the one that shows us the very nature of God. When we do that, we are approaching a God who says, look, stop worrying about how many people there are. Stop worrying about how long I've existed. Stop worrying about the things that give you a headache, about the enormity of who I am. Understand that when a 7th grader picks up a Bible and reads a book he knows nothing about and it says God cares for you, that is every bit as true to that 7th grader as it is to a 40-year-old who now understands all the historical background as to why that's there. It's not more true now that I know more than it was when I knew less. And the fact of the matter is, all of this love that God has for us is not more true when we understand more than it is when we understand less. Instead, the promise we are given is that no matter how hard it is to feel and believe, God really does care, always, no matter what. So we're in our 3rd week of our series called So What? And we're talking about the so what of the things we believe. So Jesus performs miracles, so what? The so what has very little to do with the miracle and everything to do with the person doing the miracle. Jesus did miracles not just to confirm a message, but Jesus did miracles because he felt like it. Because he cared, and because he loved the people, and the people needed help. And that teaches us this lesson. The 3rd lesson from the series called So What is this: God cares about you in big things and small things, always. God cares about you in big things and in small things, always. We're going to sing a song. Musicians come forward. We're going to sing a song, offer an invitation. The Bible teaches that when we understand to the best of our ability all these things, that we are called to repent and be baptized. That sounds like 2 things. It's really just one. And repentance, that word just means change. It means that we are called to say, I want to be able to change and not be just me, but be me along with God. And in baptism, it's a picture of that. In baptism, just as Christ was dead, buried, and raised, in baptism, we are dead, buried, and raised. And just whatever Christ does, we do. Wherever Christ goes, we go. Whatever Christ is, we want to be with him. That's what baptism means. And if you already made the decision, we have a nice warm baptistry, let's talk. If you're already immersed believer in Christ, you're looking for a perfect church home, it's not here. But we do serve a perfect God. We want to connect, we want to call, we want to cultivate. All that means is we want to meet new people, we want to share the gospel, we want to grow up while we do it. And at belief and this hope and this trust in this promise of God that he cares no matter what, all the time, every day, forever. As we stand,